It's the start of a new year, which means it's a good time to plan your annual budget if you're into that sort of thing. And if you're not, well, there's advice for you on this show too. Maureen Parent is back, and it's all starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Maureen, welcome back. It is 2023. And it is the start of a new year, so we are going to talk about budgeting. Now, I believe you and I have had this discussion before. I believe that you know that I think for most people, budgeting is a complete and total waste of time. And the reason I believe that is you're not going to do it anyways. So it's exactly like, going on a diet and counting all your calories and weighing all your food and everything. You'll do it for the first 2 days, but after that, you'll just sort of give up. So I am a cynic when it comes to budgeting. I am of the view that what you should do is set everything up and just forget it. So, okay, my hydro bill, I get paid every 2 weeks at work, so I'm going to figure out what half of my hydro bill is, and every 2 weeks I'm just going to automatically set the computer up to pay it, and that's it. That's budgeting to me. And the advantage of that is if you get paid every 2 weeks and you're paying half your hydro bill every 2 weeks, at the end of the year, you'll have made 2 extra payments. You'll have all this extra money and you didn't have to think about it. Boom. There you go. That's the show. Thanks for watching. That was Debt for no, but there's more to say about that. Now, that's my opinion. However, I do acknowledge that there is certainly some benefit to budgeting. I run a corporation, and having a budget for the corporation is kind of important, so you know what money's coming in and where you can spend it. So I'm a bit hypocritical saying, oh, well, you don't need a budget for yourself personally, and yet in my company, I maintain a budget so I know where we're going. And I think that's really the point of a budget. It's so that you can point yourself in the right direction. Right. Do you agree with that? Like, is that the whole point of why one would have a budget?
Absolutely. Having a budget helps give you ground. It gives you financial stability. It helps you with better money management. It kind of gives you a roadmap. So a budget does help. I don't mind the set and forget part of the budget, but I think that you need to do a budget before you can set your bills and then forget about them. So I do like to do a budget. I do one monthly and I do one annually.
Okay, and I guess, it's a valid point there, because in my system where I'm going to pre-program my hydro bill, well, I kind of got to know what my hydro bill is. How can I pre-program it if I don't know what it is? And it's simple enough to say, oh, well, look at my hydro bill in the month of January. Okay, but your hydro bill in the month of July is probably different, depending on whether you have air conditioning and electric heat and gas heat and all the rest of it. So I guess part of the point of an annual budgeting exercise, which is what we're going to talk about today, is to look at a year, that's what annual means, and then sort it out from there. So is that why January is the time that you personally consider your annual budget? It's the start of a year. Does that make sense? Would it make more sense to do it in September when the kids go back to school? Like what's the thought process behind January?
Right. You can do a fiscal budget or a calendar budget. I like calendar. I just work with a calendar because it's easier. So I'm like, January 1st is the beginning of the new year. So I'll do that way. You could, if you wanted to go September to, end of August every year, you can do that. Whatever works for you, as long as I think once a year you sit down and go, okay, let me plan. But I like to start January 1st. I like calendar years and months, January 1st to January 31st. Like that's how I budget.
Well, and there is some sense to that too. If you're able to make a TFSA contribution or an RSP contribution or something like that, they're all based on a calendar year as well. So let's assume then that this actually makes sense what we're talking about. You're going to have to once again try to convince me. But I do agree with the concept of taking a step back and taking a look at everything, which is really, really what we're talking about. So, okay, walk us through. Let's go right to the practical advice part of the show rather than me rambling on about why this is all bad. So walk us through the steps of how you would get started working on an annual budget. What's the process? Are you looking at last year and then looking at this year? Like, how do you actually do it in real life?
So I look at both. Right. So I will look at past statements. So typically, you'll get notification if things increase, but hydro, like your bills tend to stay relatively the same. So I'll say, well, what's been my monthly bill for hydro, for internet, for, gas, like those things, and I will set that up automatically. So I will look at bank statements to get monthly bills for insurance and rent or mortgage payments like that. And then I do look forward to the future for things that didn't happen in the past, but I expect to happen this coming year.
So things like your hydro bill. So I'm going to disagree with you on this because are you not aware of inflation? Like, have you not been paying attention to the news? Like, things are going.
I live in my own world.
I know you live in your own little world. So, so are you looking at a year's worth of history on your hydro bills? Are you looking at last month? Like, how do you decide what the number is you slot into your budget?
So I tend to be conservative. So what I will do is I will bank on closer to the highest, like maybe not the very highest month, but the next highest month. And then I'll plan for that. So then throughout the year, when I do a check-in, maybe mid-year, if I'm ahead, that's great. I can modify it. But I would rather be ahead than behind and have a cushion. So when I do a budget, I cushion things so that I'm a bit ahead and I have wiggle room. That's how I build it in.
Gotcha. So if last year the bill was $100 a month, well, maybe in your budget you're putting in 110 or 120, and that way hopefully you're overestimating. If there's extra, great. If not, well, at least you've built it in. And so how are you? So I understand the concept. I'm going to pull out my bank statement from last year, which is of course all on the computer, and I'm going to look at my credit card statement, whatever. I'm also going to look at each of my individual bills, my hydro, my gas, my cell phone, rent, mortgage, whatever, and figure out what is a good projection for next year. How are you physically doing this though? Do you have a piece of paper? Are you using an app, a spreadsheet? Like how does this actually work in real life?
I'm old world. So yes, I am like a pen and paper girl. I do prefer pen and paper. I always find I think better with a pencil in my hand, and I do budget with a pencil, not a pen. Because I think if you're doing a budget, you need to be scratching out and figuring out. And I find I figure out the best with pencil and paper. But yes, you can do it with spreadsheets. I don't know about any apps that will do annual budgets, but monthly budgets, there are certainly apps to do that. Like Mint. Anyways, we can add a link to apps in the down below. But yeah, so I do pencil and paper.
Yeah, and I'll teach you about spreadsheets someday. There's this great invention from 1980 it's a fantastic thing. Because I'm an accountant and have worked with spreadsheets my whole life, well, not my whole life, they weren't invented when I was born, but I just find a spreadsheet much easier because I don't have to scratch it out. I'm just writing it over and it does all the adding and everything for me. But I also understand the concept of a pen and a paper, particularly if you have to think. I think that's where a pen or in your case, a pencil and paper. I have lots of sticky notes and cards and things around where when I come up with an idea, it's like, okay, I'm going to write that down because then it's committed to paper.
Exactly. And then you can transfer it to a spreadsheet. So like I find with the annual budget, the first time you're doing it, you're doing a lot more thinking than the next year, right? Like it builds on each year, it builds and it works better and better every year. So the first year, you're definitely doing the nitty gritty thinking. And then once you have a structure, you can plunk it into a spreadsheet, create the formulas and use that going forward.
And how do you, so I get what you're saying. At the beginning of the year, I'm going to create my piece of paper, my spreadsheet or whatever, and maybe it's got 12 columns on it because that's how many months there are, or maybe it's got 24 columns because I get paid twice a month, or 26 columns or whatever, however you want to do it.
Yeah.
And you, I assume, are a monthly person?
Yes, I do. I look at it. So the annual budget is the culmination, obviously, of the months. Mm-hmm. So when I'm doing the annual budget, I'm taking my average monthly expenditures from what I've estimated from the prior year and multiplying by 12. So when I look at my income on an annual basis, I'm like, this is my net income that I expect to come in over the next 12 months. This is what I expect to pay for mortgage, insurance, car payment, all of those things like hydro, electricity, and I chunk it down that way, but it's all annualized. And I love doing it that way because nothing sticks in your mind more than a large amount. Like you can feel like you can fit room in your budget. Oh, I can afford $200. That's no big deal. Oh, wait a minute. That's $2,400 in a year. Is it worth it to me? Like it gives you that opportunity to challenge the choices that seem to be okay on a monthly basis, but aren't necessarily when you look at it fully for the year. Like I started, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but I started doing this because on a monthly basis, my numbers worked. But then when things came up that I thought I was all sorted for, I wasn't. And I was like, I'm missing something. What am I missing? And I found that out by doing the annual budget. That was my solution. And I found where my money was going and why it was going, why it was leaving. So the annual budget helped me structure my month more efficiently.
Yeah, because the problem with monthly is some stuff doesn't happen every month. You have to get an oil change for your car, but that's not every month. You get a flat tire, you have to do a major car repair, whatever. That happens on a less frequent basis. So that I totally get that. What do you do on a monthly basis to adjust your budget then? So at the start of the year, I come up with these numbers and I think my hydro bill is going to be $100 a month. But then of course with inflation, it ends up being $112 a month. So are you on a go forward basis, you get to the month of March and I'm 3 months into it and I'm getting behind. Are you then updating the columns going forward? Like how do you handle things that change? Because there is almost zero chance that any number on your budget is going to be right. I mean, maybe if you have a 5-year mortgage, the number doesn't change for 5 years. But other than that, everything is going to change. And certainly in 2023 with inflation being what it was and food costs going up and all the rest of it, it's always changing. So how do you adjust for that?
I think because I'm conservative in nature, I always have given myself a cushion. So I'll probably be pushing up to the max of the cushion, but I do check in. So if I need to, I will check in and adjust the budget. So what the annual budget projects is not only what you spend on a monthly basis, but what you spend on an annual basis. So that could be vacation, if you celebrate Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, and all those car repairs and the stuff that you've talked about. But the other fun stuff, the annual budget still has to cover off where that money is coming from. So, some years I'm like, okay, we're going to go camping 3 times and this is how much it costs based on da-da-da-da-da. And then you get partway through the year, you're going to have to look at your budget and go, okay, something happened. This is where I'm at now. I'm going to do a 6-month budget and project out how much money I'll get for the rest of the year and what costs are coming up for the rest of the year and what do I need to adjust. And sometimes, and it happened, obviously, where I was like, okay, we're not going camping 3 times this year. We're going to go camping once and we're going to do this thing instead. And then the rest of the money is going to go back into the budget because life went sideways a bit, and that happens all the time.
Well, if we've learned anything over the last 3 years, it's that life can go sideways. And I'm just thinking about your comment about annual versus monthly too. The annual budget shows you the biggest possible number because it's the whole month. And as I was driving here this morning, and we are recording this in the middle of winter, so it was dark and cold as I was driving here. And there was a guy who had gone to the local coffee shop. I won't mention their names, but it's named after a hockey player. And he was carrying 2 cups of coffee, whatever you call them, and holding them. And he had walked from the coffee shop and he was walking over there and all the way. So he was walking a long way to get to wherever he was going. And I'm thinking, number one, dude, your coffee is going to be cold by the time you get there. And number 2, that's a lot of walk and effort and everything for those 2 coffees that cost, I don't know how much a coffee costs, but if you had that in your annual budget as what I spend on coffee at the coffee shop, it would be a fairly big number. And I've certainly met with clients where that number on an annual basis is in the thousands of dollars. Yes. Whereas when you go to the coffee shop and spend, I don't know how much does a coffee cost, $3, $4, $5, I don't know. I haven't been to a coffee shop to buy a coffee in many years, but it's as $3 is no big deal, but $3 3 times a day, 52 weeks of the year ends up being a huge number. So I think you're right. Looking at annual does have a big effect. Now, I guess in my system where I don't have a budget, then what I'd be doing if I really, really wanted to be keeping track of this is I would have a debit card at one of those virtual banks that doesn't cost me anything, and I would transfer onto that debit card whatever my coffee money is. So if I'm going to spend $100 a month on it, then I transfer $100 every month into that card, and when it runs out, I can't buy any coffee. So I guess it all depends on your system. So so back to the adjusting part then. When I'm doing a corporate budget for a corporation, I would have 2 columns in the budget, one for the budget and then one for actual. So at the end of the month, it's, did we meet our sales targets, all that sort of thing. Are you doing something that fancy, or is it more like, okay, the numbers were pretty close, let's worry about next month now? Are you going back and looking at how accurate your projections were?
I used to. So pre-kids, I actually did. And then I would decide where that money would go. So if I actually had less expenditures for food than I planned, then I would say, okay, I can leave it in my food budget and host a dinner, or I can put it somewhere else. I can put it in savings. I could splurge on it, whatever. So I would do those determinations and see what I wanted to do with it. Post kids, no, I don't look. I just kind of go, that was close enough, and we're still in. And because I always couch things and give myself breathing room, I find that works. I think if you budget so that you're exactly to the wire, then that might be where you need to tweak more often.
Yeah, build a bit of cushion. And in your case, you got kids and you got a spouse, and there's lots of moving parts, and so you're never going to get it right to the penny correct as well. No. So I've already mentioned inflation. So things are costing a lot more than they used to, but your income is not going up as much as expenses are for a lot of people. And Ted and I talked about this on our year-end, wrap up and projection show. If inflation is running at 7%, I guess it's a little under 7% now, but your wages are going up 3%. Well, you got a bit of a deficit building every month. How do you factor that into planning for the next 12 months? Is it exactly what you already said, that, well, I build in a cushion and that's how I deal with it? I guess the question then is, how big a cushion do you have to build in? That's really the magic then.
Right. And this will be a year, like we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of stability, right, over the past while. So this will be my first year really doing an annual budget. I mean, other than last year, but this coming year will be, I'm going to have to tweak more often. Yeah, unfortunately, that's really what's going to happen, is because I'll probably do a quarterly check-in instead of a semi-annual check-in. And that's okay to do. The reason why you would check in is if you're finding that you are short every month. So when I do the annual budget, I set things up so this is going into what I call the vault. It's my emergency savings, and only things that are labeled as an emergency are the key to open the vault. And then I have my operational savings account, and then I have my monthly bills that I automatically have paid, so that whatever's left in my bank account is for me to spend on gas or groceries or eating out. Actually, I like to take eating out in cash too, so I don't overspend that. So, but when I do the annual, it's to set everything up so everything's in a plan, so I can just flow for the rest of the year, so that when the birthday comes up and I'm like, oh my God, yeah, it's April, it's your birthday. Oh crap, what are we doing? Even if I don't have a plan, I know I have the money because I already planned and I already set it up, right? I'm sick of the scramble. The annual budget and the setting things up ends the scramble, and it gives me that sense of stability. So this year I will just have to check in a couple more times just to see how things are going. But if I dip into my operational savings account for something that is not planned for, then that's a sign that I have to kind of look at the budget again and tweak.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'll be more frequent course corrections will be the theme for 2023. Now, you've mentioned a couple of terms here. You talked about your emergency savings account, and then you just mentioned your operational savings account. So what are you talking about here? How many different accounts have you got? How complicated is this?
In have three. I have a checking and two savings. So, so the emergency savings, obviously, for things like house, car, dog. I have a dog, and the car. So they're all expensive, right? So that's emergency savings. Operational savings account is something that, and I set it up that way because operational means you're kind of always working with it, right? I wanted to have a definite mindset change between the vault that never gets touched because that money has to stay there and that is my security. So that can't be touched for anything, except emergencies. And getting boots or something is not an emergency. The operational savings account is meant to go into, so the clothing budget that we set up with people, but people typically don't put the clothing money aside, right? They just kind of go, oh, I have a lot more money. And then when they go to buy clothing, they're scrambling. I'm not going to do that this month because I'm going to spend it on the clothing because 2 months ago, I've been spending that money. So clothing is something we have to spend in the year, and then birthdays, and we do celebrate Christmas, so there are gifts. So I tally what that amount looks like, and then I divide that amongst the pays, and every pay, money gets shunted from my checking to the operational savings account. So then when clothing comes up, I don't have to scramble because it's already there. I'm like, oh, this is budgeted for this. I take it out and I use it. So I'm constantly in and out of it, which is why it's operational.
Yeah, and I agree conceptually with what you're saying. You want your account that you're using for the day-to-day stuff. That's where my, everything that I spend when I go to put gas in the car, well, that's where I'm spending it from. But then you also have the account that is, maybe you call it short-term and long-term savings. Maybe you call it emergency and operational, whatever. I've done some videos on this where I call it a plan account, which is things that you're planning for the future. I don't think it matters what you call it. I think it's in your head, what the purpose of it is. Yeah. And you put it in writing. This is what the purpose is. This is what I would define as an emergency. A lot of emergencies aren't emergencies. When your car breaks down, it's an emergency when it happens, but it was entirely predictable because every car breaks down. You just don't know exactly when it's going to happen and for how much. So you want to make sure you're always looking ahead. So, what do you do then? We've talked about monthly, we've talked about annual and emergencies and operational. Do you factor anything longer term into this? So, I want to retire in 20 years. I'm sending my kid to college in 10 years. I want to buy a house in 5 years. I got to replace my car. Do you put any long-term thinking into this annual budget?
I do. That's one of there was two reasons why I had started annual budgeting. The one was because I seem to have money every month, but not for everything. So that was one reason. The other reason was because, there was always you should set up short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. And as soon as you ask me that, my brain just shuts off, and it's, it's like a little, what is that? Oh my God, the tumbleweed going through my brain. I'm like, I don't know. And sometimes the long-term goals seemed so far away and so unattainable that they were just depressing. So I didn't want to set a goal. I wanted to have just something in place. So because nothing was coming to mind, I thought, you know what? If I just start annually, things will come up. And they did. Because then I was like, oh, yeah, my second annual budget, I was like, oh, I have a lease. My lease is going to come up in 4 years. So then when I was looking at my budget, I asked myself, okay, can I afford to set money aside to buy out my lease? Or will I have to release or finance the end? What is my answer? And I had to get used to the answer no, right? Because I wasn't doing this job. This is decades ago. And I think that's really important when you're doing a budget. You have to treat it like it's data. It's take the emotion out of it as much as possible and be willing to say, no, I can't right now. And just don't say no, I can't right now. Because this other stuff is important. Because I have options of releasing or financing out, I don't have to buy it out. I think it's more important I offer my kids some experiences for their growth and development. So that was my choice. But that's one of the reasons why I did the annual budget is because things started to come up where I started to plan long-term because I started to think that way. Oh yeah, this is coming up. What am I doing with that? So I certainly do add it in as an element because that's part of what you want to do, but know that it is okay to say not right now.
Yeah. And if in your example, I have to buy out my car in 4 years and the buyout price is going to be X number of dollars, well, I could very easily say, okay, well, divide by 48 months. I need to be putting aside this much money each month. But you're always balancing competing objectives. So my example where in your case, you've got kids, but you also want to retire. Well, the kids
I work until I'm dead.
That's it, man. And I got rid of my kids, so I'm good too. But it's okay if my kid is, I don't know, 10 years old today and is going to go to school when they're 18, I've got 8 years to save for that. Whereas if I'm 40 years old today, I wish, and I wanted to retire at age 65, I got 25 years to get there. Now, I probably need more money to retire than what I need for my kid. So you do have to have a bit of a longer term perspective on it. But let's face it, if someone's listening to us today and they've got debt, well, I would say your priority is to pay down that debt. There's no sense putting money in a savings account and earning 0 or 3% or whatever when you're carrying a credit card at 20%. So you got to look at all of those long-term factors. Now,
and people focus on, I have to have my RSP in place because I have to take advantage of the compound interest, and I have to have my future in place. And one of the things I try to stress is that if your present isn't secure, you will always rob from your future, and you will have a tax hit, and it compounds the problem. Yes, saving for retirement is important. My mom gave me an example though, a couple of times in her life, like she'd save for retirement, life went sideways. She had to take it out and she had to restart a few times. So just because you start now doesn't mean it's golden and perfect for the future. So I always try to focus on build your present, get that as secure as possible. Because if you're building cash into a vault as well, like that you're never touching, that's helping your future. And then you get to a point where you're like, okay, how can I do investments? What can I do next step, right? So I think long-term planning is important, but some of us check out when it's too far in advance. That's 25 years from now. Oh my God, I got a lot of time. Today, I have this problem. I have this bill. I have this child. I have this. That's going to have to take care of itself. So that's why I like the system of the habit of setting up a saving system that you never touch, because that will eventually be what you build off of for your future.
Yeah, and you got to be realistic about all this. It would be great if I could save $200 a month, but that may not be realistic because I've got living expenses. So, but if I could save $25 a month, okay, well, that, maybe it does mean I got to skip the coffee shop a few times, or I've got to pick up a part-time job or something. But starting small is a lot better than not doing anything at all.
Exactly, because you create two habits, the habit of saving and the habit of not touching it. And so as you get the opportunity to build on it, because there was a podcast you had done, how to invest if you can only put $100 aside or less. So there are ways to do it. But yeah, so you want to, I think sometimes when you're starting, it's more important to build the habit of saving and not touching, no matter how much is in there, because you're just trying to create a new system.
Yeah, $10 isn't a massive amount of money, but it's better than zero. And you're right, it becomes habit forming. Again, assuming you've cleaned up debt and all the other urgent things. So, okay, we're running short on time here. So I want to ask you one final question here. And that is, what if the person watching is like me and they just hate budgeting and they don't want to go looking at all their past statements and rummaging through their computer in the drawer with all the statements and everything? What about them? How can they benefit from this whole process? What are their options, if any? Can they use a different system? Like, what do you say to someone like me?
Right. Meh.
There you go. That's the answer, people. Meh. You're on your own, people. You're on your own. Good luck to you.
Even if you don't like to go back in time and look at statements, right? Like most people that I meet that don't really want to budget, they still have an idea of what they spend on expenses. So you can still kind of have that gist. And then the only thing that I would say, if someone who doesn't like to budget, before you spend money, at least make a list of things that you want to achieve. Like, even if you don't budget, just have an idea of where you'd like your money to go. So that every time you go to spend money, you're like, okay, well, I have money for this. I love to go, hiking. I want to get a kayak, right? If you're spending money on this, because you don't have a budget, nothing's set up, are you going to be able to get that kayak? Like, how are you working your system? So sometimes if you don't want to have a budget, then just operate with thinking before you spend, which is always a great idea, and trying to spend the least amount possible. Sometimes that's the best budget. I'm just going to not spend money as much as possible and see where that gets you. Or you can spend 2 months, like if you normally hibernate in the winter, and you don't go out, well, then you've just saved a bunch of money. So just make sure you don't spend it and put it towards something.
Yeah. And it's ultimately, you got to come up with a system that works for you. And I guess kind of what you're saying is, hey, suck it up. And we're not talking about 100 hours of work here. No. How long does it possibly take you to go into your online banking and pull up what you spent last month? You can download it. You can look at it on the screen. How hard is it to look at, spend the next month when all your bills come in and look at them? Oh, that's how much I spent. Like it's not the hardest thing in the world. There are apps that do
it for you as well. Like if you're willing to let an app link to your bank account, they'll give you a chart. This is where you spent your money. My bank has an app, and it can tell me where I spend my money. And it helps me set my budget limit, and it'll tell me if I'm over or under. So, I mean, you could do it through your bank as well. Not all of them, but some of them have those apps within their system. And then it's super simple. You don't have to look at it. They do it for you.
Right. Awesome. And we're not going to mention the banks because they're not paying me any money to advertise on this show. So they don't get the free publicity. But yeah, there's lots of different resources out there. We're going to put a bunch of links in the show notes over on YouTube so people can go and look at that. I think ultimately you got to decide, do you want to be in control of your money or not? That's what it comes down to. And if you do, and I agree, you should be, I think you should be in control of your money and your health and your life and all the rest of it, then you got to take a step back at some point, pause, take a look at the big picture, and figure out what adjustments you want to make. I'm an accountant, and even I don't want to be spending 4 hours a month updating a spreadsheet. But
I never do that. God, no.
But you do want to have some big picture as to where everything's going. So whatever system is going to work for you, that's what you need to do. So excellent. Maureen, thank you for kicking off 2023 with us here. Again, I'll put links in the show notes to anybody who wants to reach you. You hang out in Ottawa and Canada. So anybody in that area who is in need of a licensed insolvency trustee, you're the person they can track down.
Or even if they have questions on an annual budget.
There you go.
Yeah.
Don't call me because but Maureen would be happy to help you with that. Maureen, thanks very much for being here today.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you very much. That is our show for today. As I said, I'm going to put links in the show notes to everything we talked about. We've got a whole bunch of resources on our own websites as well. We've got budgeting templates, all that kind of stuff is there. So feel free to make use of all of it. If you are watching this on YouTube, all the show notes are there. While you're there, hit the link button, the notification, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. It helps get the word out. And if you're listening on the audio version, thank you very much. Again, subscribe on whatever your favorite podcasting app is. Until next week, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.